This is Covering the Spread. Here are your hosts, Jim Saunders and Dr. Ed Feng.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome on into Covering the Spread. That's right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and NumberFire.com as we are taking a look at Week 11 of the NFL season from a betting perspective and breaking down the best values on the board with Edward Egros coming up next. My name is Jim Saunders. I am a senior writer and analyst for NumberFire.com, joined here as always by Ed Feng. You can find his work over at thepowerrank.com and find Ed on Twitter at thepowerrank as well. Ed, I am excited for this week because we get the Ed and Edward show once again, but also we get Houston against Baltimore, and I was trying to decide, I was like trying to figure out in my mind a list of quarterbacks who would be good in a bad situation, and I think that Deshaun Watson is on that list, and I think Patrick Mahomes and Russell Wilson are. And I think that Lamar Jackson's kind of like teetering on that edge, and it's a very short list. We get to see two of the most exciting quarterbacks in football in the same game. So I am pumped for that. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Yeah, I'm pumped for that as well. And it's definitely a game I want to talk about and cover in the future.
And we will. And Edward's going to talk about that one as well. So make sure you follow Edward Egros on Twitter at EdWithSports. You can also find him on TVG's More Ways to Win. Got a couple of podcasts over on Vocal. One of those is called Hazard Play, which we will discuss because they talk betting, but they also talk bad college football games. And Northwestern is in one of those this weekend. Edward got his master's from Northwestern, so we can get a little bit about that too. Other one is Cowboys Deep Cuts, and the Cowboys, very frustrating. Someone who enjoys Dak Prescott right now, so we'll talk about them as well. And of course, Edward teaches analytics at SMU, so follow Edward on Twitter at EdWithSports. Yesterday on the College Football Betting Podcast, we talked with Ed about his numbers. Got a little crash course in college basketball betting too via Ed, talking about how his model works, what numbers go in there, and how we can kind of find some key numbers to look at when it comes to college basketball. Also previewed Week 12 of college football. Broke down the implications of the college football playoff rankings, which just came out, and a couple of teams' playoff odds, Clemson, Minnesota. We talked about the Pac-12 as well. To find that, just search for Covering the Spread wherever you get your podcasts, and also rate and review the podcast. That is a huge help to us. Thank you to those of you who have done so already, because that does help us out a ton. Now, before we get to Edward, we got to go back to last week and talk about week 10 of the NFL. We had Joe Ostrowski on. Let's go through that, and then we'll take a look at Week 11.
Covering the past.
All right, last week we had Joe Ostrowski of 670 The Score and You Better You Bet on to preview Week 10 of the NFL. Follow Joe on Twitter at Joe0670. He mentioned betting Green Bay minus 5.5 against the Panthers. Ned, I think you had the Panthers side of this one. The Packers covered there by a yard. The lineman tried to pull McCaffrey across. Well, super close call.
Somebody missed a block. I think McCaffrey glides in there if someone gets a block on, I think, Fat Girl, who just came storming through there and hit him in the backfield or at the line of scrimmage. So
I mean, if an offensive lineman's trying to pull a dude across the line of scrimmage, that means he didn't block somebody.
And maybe it was him, maybe it was someone else. I mean, I like that bet. I would still make it again. I still have a lot of questions about this Green Bay defense. We don't get to test that this week, but there will be many opportunities in the future.
I didn't talk about this on the show, but I had the under in that game, and they would have had. I had 47, and I think it would have been 46 had McCaffrey scored, and they would have gone for 2. So I was very nervous that whole time, and it was a sweat, that was for sure.
Well, and I mean, it was tough if you're a Packers fan, right? Because they really couldn't stop them. Towards the end of the game, they had a 14-point lead. Carolina does the appropriate thing and goes for 2 when they were down 8, which I just love because that's the right thing to do by the analytics. You know what you have to do next time. You still have an opportunity to tie the game when you score again, like they did, even if they didn't make the 2-point conversion. So yeah, I don't know. Like, I actually have a friend of mine's a big Packers fan. He doesn't seem as concerned about their defense as I am for him. But we'll see how that all shakes out the rest of the season.
It'd be a concern for me if my team got shredded by Kyle Allen. I will say
that.
Exactly. Kyle Allen's been a below average quarterback this year from an efficiency perspective. And if he does it in Lambeau, Andy Reid,
in those conditions.
Like Andy Reid shredding you the backup quarterback, it's Andy Reid, that's whatever. Phillip Rivers has been a good quarterback for a long time, whatever. Kyle Allen and Lambeau, different story. So I think that we'll be talking about Green Bay's defense, I'm sure, at some point in the future. No points allowed this week, though, because they're on a bye. Joe mentioned the under on Vikings-Cowboys at 48 points. That one did go over at 52 points there. Mentioned the 49ers -6. We recorded that on Thursday, and that was a Monday night game, which means we didn't have injury reports. It was not clear at that time that George Kittle would miss. They also lost Emmanuel Sanders, Joe Staley, and Matt Breida during the game. So Seahawks won that game outright in overtime. The Bengals.
We should talk about that game a little bit, man. That was an insane game.
Yeah.
Both teams kind of sucked in some sense, you know.
It was it was one of the sloppiest, fumbliest, is that a word? Football games I've seen at the professional. I've watched a lot of Northwestern football, so I've seen a lot of sloppy football, but at the professional level, and I watched Miami against, was it Washington?
Right.
I think that game. I watched Jets-Giants. It was one of the sloppier games I've seen. I don't expect that from a Russell Wilson, Kyle Shanahan matchup.
Yeah, and it was just, I mean, it actually added a lot to the excitement.
Yeah.
But I feel when like both teams have about 300 yards, both teams fumble it to the other defense for a touchdown.
Yeah.
A lot of bad throws down the stretch too. Wilson threw the pick.
Yeah.
Garoppolo threw almost a few picks.
Yeah.
So I really feel like the tie should have been the result there, right?
Yes, exactly. And Shanahan mentioned like the thought process behind, not going for the tie, whether he should have, etc. But if you could have gotten out of that game with a tie, probably would have been, an ideal route there. Joe mentioned the Bengals +10 against the Ravens, but Lamar Jackson did Lamar Jackson stuff there. And finally, he had the Dolphins +10.5. The spread didn't move in that game, even when it was announced that Jacoby Brissett was out, which was weird. I want to hear your thoughts on this, but the Dolphins won that one outright. The spread was 10.5 the entire week. It never moved, even when Brissett was announced out. I found that very odd. I didn't feel good enough about it to bet the Dolphins, but it was very weird to me that the market viewed there as being zero difference between Brian Hoyer and Jacoby Brissett.
I mean, I don't think I'm as shocked. I've never been high on Brissett. He's had a bunch of good games, in games that I've been against Indianapolis. So I certainly remember those. But, you look at his PFF grades, they're not particularly good. Mm-hmm. Brian Hoyer's a long-time NFL backup. I think he looked pretty good in that one game that he was in.
Against the Steelers, he did, yeah.
So I guess I'm less surprised.
Yeah. We were talking about it in the Slack on Number Fire, and I found it kind of weird, but obviously that's hindsight. I didn't have enough confidence in it to bet it, so what am I saying? Who am I to talk? Right. But still, I thought it was very interesting there. Final one was I had Atlanta's team total over 19 because I was too chicken to bet the spread, and then Atlanta won that game outright. They scored 26 points, but I liked Atlanta's offense. I did not think they would come close to doing that. There was a reason that I did not bet the spread in that game. It was because I thought their defense would get torched. That's just a weird game.
Yeah. No, it's a weird game. And, these teams that are playing well, like New Orleans and San Francisco, the market kind of gets out ahead of that. Yeah. Usually the numbers are like, hey, hold on. And, for instance, my numbers had San Francisco by 2 at home. Not something I wanted to bet just because of that number. Sure. But you always get that kind of situation with these teams that are, have a really good chunk of the season and maybe expect a little regression.
Right, exactly. And it made sense that it happened. It did not make sense the fashion in which it happened, but definitely a fun one there. We'll break down Week 11 in just 1 second. But first, if you want to get in on the action, check out the FanDuel Sportsbook and place your first bet today. If you lose, FanDuel will give you a refund up to $500 in site credit. Visit sportsbook.fanduel.com for more details. Terms and conditions apply. Must be 21 plus and physically present in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, or Indiana, or of course any of the retail locations as well. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Let's bring in Edward Egros now. Follow Edward on Twitter at EdWithSports. Of course, you can find him on TVG's More Ways to Win. Also, the podcast on Vocal, Hazard Play, and the Cowboys Deep Cuts. Let's get Edward's thoughts on Week 11 for the NFL.
Covering the present.
Let's welcome Edward Egros back into covering the spread. Edward, you've been a staple on the show here since its inception, so thank you for coming on once again. How are you doing today?
I am doing very well. It's nice to be a staple in something. That's how I like to live life, is to at least have that sort of foundation, that sort of level of consistency somewhere.
We can be your foundation. I am very okay with that personally, and I would like to keep it that way because it's fun to talk to you about these things, and especially now because, Edward, I feel like we kind of had to have you on this week because on Hazard Play, which is one of your podcasts on Vocal, you talk about betting terrible college football games, and Northwestern plays UMass this week, and they are a 40.5-point favorite at FanDuel Sportsbook. So please tell me that this game will be discussed on Hazard Play this week.
Ask and ye shall receive. It is one of our two featured games on Hazard Play. First off, UMass is a pod favorite, as we like to say in the
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Akron, UTEP, Bowling Green, they're also pod favorites. Now, other people would refer to them as other things, and I'll let you figure out what I mean by that. UMass is an interesting spot, and I think so is Northwestern. And not to sort of dig too deeply into my rationale or how we're going to discuss this game, but my biggest question when it comes to this game is, can Northwestern score 41 points or 40 points? Just having the ball against anybody, are they capable of scoring that much? So that's my first question. Then my second question is, if they do, can UMass at least get like a touchdown or 10 points or something like that to where you now need Northwestern to score 50 to cover?
Right. Well, that's what when Ed DM'd me the line earlier this week, and my question to him was like, how many defensive touchdowns does Northwestern have to score? Because their offense isn't putting up 40. I know that.
I know, but UMass's defense is so dreadful.
But
both their units are basically bottom of the barrel.
Like, I don't know, man. Like, I think Northwestern will go more up tempo because they are very aware of how bad they are against bad teams, and they slow things down a bit, a lot, I should say. But it's so hard to I think they need 2 defensive touchdowns to cover this number. It's insane.
They probably do. And I guess, though, if you're playing a higher pace of play, that gives UMass some more opportunities to get, say, maybe 2 or 3 field goals. And then, it's almost as if, for Northwestern to comfortably win this game, it needs to be slow tempo, which then means they're not covering 40.5. Man,
this is bad. I don't know. I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts on this, the full thoughts on Hazard Play, so I'll be sure to check that out. But this game it's going to be rough. Now, the other podcast you have, Edward, on Vocal is discussing the Dallas Cowboys deep cuts, and they've been a weird team to diagnose this year. So if you were to look at Dak Prescott's numbers, you would think that they would be a team to buy right now because Dak has been awesome. He's been, if we didn't look at record, he'd be an MVP contender. So do you have enough faith in the coaching staff here to justify buying the Cowboys, or should we assume the self-inflicted sputtering continues here?
I feel like I'm getting into professor mode here when I explain this because, granted, you guys know this already, but sometimes I think it's good for a friendly reminder of what terms like inefficient means. Yeah. And inefficient doesn't mean terrible. It doesn't mean they don't know what they're doing or incompetent. It just means that the offense could be running better than it already is. And for a long time, Jason Garrett and this Cowboys offense has been running inefficiently with how much they run Zeke, when they run Zeke, things like that. Well, inefficiency will cost you very close football games. And it's happened over the course of the last few years. Now, that 7-1 mark towards the end of 2018, everything was clicking. They wanted to use Amari Cooper more, and so it became more efficient. So they were winning those close games. But it's as if they didn't learn those lessons at all once they got into this year and once the load management, quote unquote, for Zeke was sort of taken off to where Zeke could sort of run at will and run at full strength. Then all of a sudden that inefficiency sort of came back to haunt them. And I think that's exactly what's going on here. The more I do this, the more I think whenever we see an odd coaching decision on the field, that it's entirely based upon who they trust. They have practiced with these players. They've evaluated these players to a T. It's not that coaches don't know anything. Sometimes they overthink things or they don't quite think the entire context. That certainly happens. But when it comes to Jason Garrett, I watched Dak Prescott when he practiced a lot with the Cowboys when I was covering them on a regular basis for local television. And Dak was never a great practice quarterback. Never, ever. He always had errant throws, never seemed like he had total command of the offense. But then you'd put him in a football game, and he looked like a completely different guy. And I look at Jason Garrett and go, well, he has these same data points in practice as he does in games. And in fact, he has more data points because he watches practice far more than, say, I do in certain windows. So who does he trust more? Does he trust Dak, who has had errant throws sometimes in his career, or does he trust Zeke, which, with this offensive line tends to be a little bit more reliable, but it is naturally inefficient? So on the one hand, I understand the decision-making at the end of that Minnesota game, but on the other hand, at some point, you do have to trust your starting quarterback. And I am still not sure Jason Garrett does. And that may ultimately be his undoing, is just not trusting the guy he's been given. If you don't trust Dak, then either you need a coach who does, or you need to have a quarterback who you trust. And I'm still thinking there's a bit of a disconnect there.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Edward, we got to see Dak Prescott's hips on the Sunday night broadcast. Are your hips as flexible as the man who runs the show in Dallas?
That flexibility is second to none. I'm surprised that's not used in scouting reports more often. We are in this next-gen stats era. We really need to have more torque degree measurements that can be used to help us evaluate players. Let's make a spider chart of torque and things like that. And I think that's going to go a long way towards power ranking our quarterbacks for the next draft.
That sounds good. So, Edward, let's talk about Texans at Ravens. Ravens are a 4.5-point favorite. The total is 49. In the NFL MVP race, Lamar Jackson is plus 260, behind only Russell Wilson at plus 160, and Deshaun Watson is 6-1. Any thoughts on either the MVP race or this game?
So I'll start with the MVP race, and I almost would love your thoughts on this, where I wonder if MVP races and individual awards, it's a more volatile market than, say, games from week to week, in large part because, I remember when Aaron Rodgers was the favorite to win this thing, and now I think we would all agree that, unless the Packers win out and all of a sudden we see a completely different quarterback behind center, Aaron Rodgers has no chance to win this. Mm-hmm. So I wonder if that market's naturally more volatile to where, because we haven't seen Houston in a little bit and other quarterbacks have had great performances, or at least performances that have won them really good games, like Lamar Jackson against the Patriots, like Russell Wilson against the previously undefeated Niners. So I wonder if Deshaun Watson is one of those buy low situations where, because we haven't seen him in a while, all of a sudden we're forgetting about him. I think Watson is in a great spot, personally, for him to possibly win this whole thing. Fifth in total QBR, fifth in the new metric that Ben Baldwin created, combining a completion percentage above expected and EPA per play. Love that metric, by the way. He's fifth in that department. Where Watson, I think, does have a disadvantage is, historically, the MVP winner, it comes from the leader of the team that scores the most points. Texans right now have the eighth most points per game right now. But if you go by winning percentage in terms of the rest of the schedule, the Texans have the ninth toughest schedule of everybody in the NFL. But Seattle is fourth, Baltimore is eighth. So other frontrunners ahead of Deshaun Watson have tougher schedules down the stretch. So putting all of that together, I go, yeah, Watson has a shot at this.
I think it's interesting, too, because he's been good, and he's had – like we talk about moments for Heisman winners. Like we talk about having that moment where you do well on a national stage. You could have made a pitch for Deshaun Watson's moment being that win on the road against the Chiefs, but we haven't really seen him in a lot of big spots. He almost had that moment, too, in week 1 against the Saints. And I think that this could be another spot where he could generate that attention, because they are 4.5-point road underdogs. They're facing Lamar Jackson, who has gotten a lot of very well-deserved and positive buzz recently, given that electric run against Cincinnati and that win over New England. I think that we talk about buying before inflection points. Deshaun Watson has a potential inflection point coming up on Sunday in this high-profile game. So I think that if you want to bet Deshaun Watson, you probably should get him now before Sunday occurs. Is that a correct line of thinking?
I think so. I think you hit the nail on the head. If it's going to go in any one direction, it's going to go towards becoming the favorite. And if he sort of falls back even more, then he's not going to have an opportunity to catch up. In large part because he does play in the AFC South. He hasn't played the Titans yet, or Tampa Bay, or Denver. Now he does have Indianapolis again, which is interesting. He does have New England 1st of December, so that's another inflection point like you're talking about. But down the stretch, there are a lot of clunkers. And I would include the Titans as a clunker just because I don't think they're going to be doing enough for them to be sort of well-regarded as one of the great teams in the AFC, even though I love that offense. I love how it's constructed. Once they have a great quarterback, watch out for the Titans. But they're not in that point yet. So to me, for Deshaun Watson to win this MVP race, he pretty much has to do it now within, say, the next 3 games, and then has to look pretty good the rest of the way. Now, I think he can do it, but these next 3 games, I think, will pretty much make or break his chances.
So let's talk about this game then. We've got the total here up to 51.5, and the Ravens are 4.5-point favorites. Is this a good spot for Deshaun Watson, or are you taking the Ravens here?
I think the Texans can pull this off. I think they can be an outright winner here. First off, the play here is the over. 2 elite quarterbacks who I think can do whatever they want or just about whatever they want. So they'll score their points. And so we could have like a 30-28 kind of game. So I think that's possible. Second thing, too, is when you look at success rates, certainly Baltimore is number 1 in rushing success rate. No doubt about that. And then they're 10th in passing success rate, which is also really, really good. And again, let's respect Lamar Jackson, the arm as well as the feet. But when it comes to Houston, they're 6th in rushing success rate, 2nd in passing success rate. So overall, Houston's success rate offensively is better than Baltimore's. We just don't talk about it as much because Houston is sort of that under-the-radar kind of team. So definitely I'm taking Houston to cover, and I can definitely see them winning it outright.
Excellent. So let's move on to Patriots at Eagles. Patriots are 3.5-point favorite on the road, total of 44.5. What are you seeing in this game?
Well, as far as this game is concerned, I don't see an impressive rebound for New England, but I think it's enough of a rebound for them to win the game. I'm very much tempted perhaps to buy a point and take the Patriots at -2.5 because I actually do think it's going to be pretty close. Ed, I'm going to borrow your rationale here and say that this insane turnover differential for New England at +17, a good 4 takeaways better than second place. I just don't know how sustainable that is. And yeah, I have the utmost respect for this New England secondary, no doubt about it, but you're going to have bad games. It's just going to happen. And that's what we saw in the Baltimore contest. It's almost as if you're looking at an overall average, all the great performances happened at the start of the year, and now this regression to the mean for this passing defense for New England is probably about to happen. And what better place for that to happen is coming off a bye week where there may be a little bit of rust. Not to mention, Philadelphia is getting a little bit healthier. I don't want to say that not having Deshaun Jackson explains all of the offensive woes, but not having Deshaun Jackson explains all of the offensive woes. They need a deep threat to be effective. They need a number of different weapons. And when they don't have that, Philadelphia becomes incredibly anemic. But now it looks like they're starting to put things together. And I think Philadelphia can keep this game close.
And the good thing, too, for Philadelphia is that they've had the bye week to plan. They know Deshaun Jackson is no longer in the plans. And it sounds like J.J. Arcega-Whiteside may eventually be getting more involved. And he would be a guy who would have the potential to be more of a field stretcher. Like Mac Hollins couldn't quite do it. So I think that that's definitely interesting. Do you have any read on the total in this game, Edward? Or is it mostly just Pats minus if you can buy 2.5?
As far as the total around that number, I'm probably leaning towards the over, not comfortably so. Okay. It may not be something that I bite on just because certainly some of the scenarios include, Tom Brady not scoring very much at all. And I don't see Philadelphia, say, hanging 30. So that one, may be a little bit nerve-wracking for me. And plus, too, I think one of the ways that Philadelphia might keep this game close is through the usage of tight ends. Zach Ertz and Dallas Goedert individually have not been elite, but collectively they've been a pretty good tight end duo, perhaps the best tight end duo in football, though I think Witten and Jarwin with the Cowboys could certainly, lay claim to, that honor as well. But if you're using tight ends a good bit more, then I think it slows the pace down. Certainly doesn't, create explosive plays or chunk plays. So it may very well be something where Philadelphia keeps it close by slowing it down, which would lean under here.
Okay, so pretty efficient total, and we want to buy the Patriots to -2.5, and I think that's what you're saying about the tight ends makes sense. I was looking at Sharp Football stats, see their success rates with 2 tight end sets, and I believe it was pretty good relative to 3 receiver sets. So I think it would make sense to lean on Dallas Goedert going forward. Let's talk here about the Chiefs and the Chargers out in Mexico City. This is the Monday night game. The Chiefs, 4-point favorites now at FanDuel Sportsbook. The total here is 52.5, and the Chiefs might be getting their left tackle, Eric Fisher, back this week, meaning that they would be the healthiest they've been since week 1. So, Edward, do you view this as being a chance to buy low on this Chiefs offense, which has been banged up since halfway through the first quarter in week 1?
It's definitely something where I think when it comes to the skill positions, the Chiefs were already on the mend, getting several guys back. And I know we make a big deal about that sack on 3rd and 2 last week where the Chiefs could have ended it. When I look at the Chiefs, certainly being healthy helps a ton. And this offense is going to be outright dangerous. And I hate to do this, but I think this may be a serious time where we need to call into question some of Andy Reid's decision-making. Kansas City ranks 9th from the bottom in 4th down conversion attempts. And yes, you have to take that stat with a grain of salt because situation matters, field position matters, distance matters, all of those things. Certainly if you're the number one, team in football, maybe you don't go for it on 4th down as much. But still, though, for Kansas City to be 9th from the bottom in 4th down conversion attempts, when you have Pat Mahomes as your quarterback and you have a lot of naturally close games, I would be going for it more often. And so I think what that does for me is say, well, yes, the Chiefs are healthy and that's huge. But if they're in another contest with another high-scoring offense, then I may not be so bullish on the Chiefs as say I was last year.
Interesting. Yeah, you bring up a good point, Edward, on the 4th down decision-making, because you said, if they were the best team, then you might not go for it as much. And I think that's not talked about much, right? Because going for it on 4th down is a high-variance strategy, because you either make it and give yourself an opportunity to score, or you give the opponent a short field. It's more conservative to punt, right? So it's the kind of thing you want to do in close games or when you're down, and maybe punting when you're up a few touchdowns in the 4th quarter is an okay thing.
Yeah, exactly. And I think when you look at sort of the 4th down attempt numbers of the entire list, you have good teams that have not attempted too many 4th downs. And it doesn't mean that the stat is useless or anything like that. It just means that sometimes it's a matter of, well, they played a lot of close games or they trust their offense more. A lot of factors go into it. And so I don't want to be one of the nerds to come in and say, well, you're not going for it on 4th down as much. You're not trusting the math as much. No, it's situation. You have to have situational awareness. But Kansas City has played a lot of close games, and they don't have the record that they did last year. And I do think that is a team that you can point to and say, well, you should be going for it on 4th down more often. And they're not. And you have the offense that you should be able to trust in those high leverage situations, and it's just not happening. And as many accolades as I've had for Andy Reid over the years, this is one where I go, I've got some real question marks here in terms of him just being a little bit more forward thinking.
Well, situational football too has been always kind of the black spot on Andy Reid, where people are questioning timeout usage, end of game management, and 4th down decisions may be up there as well. So with that in mind, do you have a read on the total or the spread in this game, or are they pretty efficient to you?
Well, as someone who believes the Chargers can win 8 to 9 games, I'm still taking Kansas City here at -4. At some point, I think Mahomes is due for a 50-point outing. And yeah, I mean 50. He's capable of this. And I don't know when it's going to happen, but it could happen very soon, especially if everybody's on the mend. And again, going back to my point earlier when I was talking about the Cowboys, having Eric Fisher back may not necessarily mean that the left tackle position just gets insanely better, though it could. Mm-hmm. It may also simply mean that the Chiefs just trust the protection more for Pat Mahomes. It may be trust more than anything else. It could be a placebo effect more than anything else. And not to discount how good Fisher is, but with that sort of quote unquote placebo effect. All of a sudden, you're trusting Mahomes to throw deep more because you know the protection is going to be a good bit better, or you are going to run to the left side, perhaps on quarterback designs more often than you otherwise would. And now all of a sudden you're scoring more points, and it's not necessarily the talent on the field, it's the trust from the play designers. So I look at that and go, at some point, Kansas City's going to have an insane performance. It could be as soon as Monday.
Excellent. Edward, any other games or bets that on the board that you see that you like for Week 11?
Rams-Bears looks very interesting to me, in large part because Jared Goff has done really poorly when it comes to pressure. And he's not this play-action savant that we remember from a year ago. And to me, this is going to be a great litmus test when it comes to, the Bears have some real problems offensively. But defensively, they can generate a little bit of pressure. They don't have the takeaways like they did last year. So the Bears, they're not competing in the division. They're not going to be a team that you look for in terms of a Super Bowl bid. But I think they're just good enough of a challenge to where if the Rams have real serious problems, then this game is going to be close or they just lose it outright. And I think it's going to be a great diagnosis as far as the Rams are concerned to say, all right, can we trust Jared Goff going forward? Can we trust this offensive line going forward with all of the issues that they've had? Or is it going to be so bad that they lose to a rather depleted Chicago team? And if they are, then I think that very much should sort of change our minds as far as, say, how LA has been structured and some of the decisions they made. Because it's funny, we look at the Rams, in such an interesting way. Analytically, they've done a lot of things that have become very forward-thinking, but they've also given some humongous contracts to inefficient players.
Right.
And does that ultimately come back to bite them? And are we seeing sort of an instantaneous thing where these inefficient contracts are coming back to bite them very, very quickly, whereas maybe we thought it would be like a 2 or 3 year effort. So that's going to be one I'm interested in. And then also, too, how can you not love the Dolphins at this point? I mean, they're a covering machine, baby.
Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, I mean, going back to the Rams, I think inevitably they're going to pay for giving away these big contracts. But, right? Ed? What's that?
Was that a pun?
Was it?
You said they'll pay.
Oh, yes. Yeah, nice. Yeah, absolutely. We'll see about next year. I mean, my numbers still like them a lot this year. Not necessarily to cover in this game. But, yeah, down the road, I definitely think they will pay.
I am, to a flaw, a Jared Goff backer. I am also on the Bears plus 6.5, Edward. I'll be talking about that and covering the future for today. So it's reassuring that we agree there, but it also makes me sad as someone who does enjoy Jared Goff quite a bit, more than I should. I'll say it that way.
I like Jared Goff. Just the coaching tree and the football tree that tends to be very small. I mean, Sonny Dykes coached Jared Goff at Cal. Sonny Dykes is now at SMU. One of my favorite people. And so I'd like for him to do well, but losing that Steelers game, that was troubling. And it's troubling beyond just one contest. I think it's troubling for the future.
Having backups at left guard, center, and right tackle also doesn't help all that much. Not having Brandon Cooks, it's a really tough situation. So, Edward, I want to thank you for swinging by once again today. Like I said, been a staple here, so I appreciate finally getting you we get some NFL talk, which has been fun. So I enjoyed that. Make sure you check out Edward's podcasts. We have Hazard Play and also Cowboys Deep Cuts. Edward, thank you so much for taking time out of your very busy schedule. We appreciate it, and good luck to you in Week 11.
Covering the future.
Big thank you once again to Edward Egros for swinging by and talking about Week 11 of the NFL. Always a pleasure to chat with Edward and get some NFL thoughts for today as well. And we talked about the Cowboys with Edward, and I thought he gave some really good insights about how maybe we shouldn't expect the coaching to change, even though it's been inefficient so far this year. What are your thoughts on something like that? Because I thought Edward's thoughts are very interesting. I want to hear your thoughts on a situation like that too, where it's clearly inefficient coaching, but it's hard to expect a reason to change.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, my numbers really like Dallas's offense. They really dislike Dallas's defense. I think they've been mostly on the side of Dallas this year. But maybe there's a good reason for that the markets are less high on them because of the play calling.
Right.
You've heard like Whale Camper talk about that a lot.
Right.
On the show and about the play calling, and obviously that's not something that your pure efficiencies can kind of capture in terms of how that's going to play out. So, yeah, I think it's an interesting thing and definitely something I'll be keeping an eye on.
And his discussion around their faith in Dak was very interesting because I never thought that would have been the thing because Dak's been so good. Like, why wouldn't they have faith? But like we do see that faith does dictate coaching because the Titans at the beginning of the year would not throw with Marcus Mariota. And now they're still not throwing a lot with Ryan Tannehill, but they've been more efficient coaching because they have more faith in their quarterback, and Tannehill has legitimized that. So I think it makes sense. I just never thought that would have been the issue, but good to hear Edwards' thoughts there, given how much he knows about this Cowboys team. Before we dive into covering the future, Ed and I always preach searching for the best value when betting on games. Well, look no further than the new odds comparison our engineers have developed over at numberfire.com. It's called OddsFire. OddsFire is the premier odds comparison experience across major bookmakers in the regulated U.S. market. Compare odds, quickly identify the best value, and even examine first-party FanDuel data all in one place. Never settle, always get the best odds. Check out the experience for free now on Numberfire or at oddsfire.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Let's dive into this week's picks for us, Ed. Where are you looking at for your covering the future pick for week number 11?
Yeah, I mean, I like Houston's side. I got a +4. Guess I should have waited a little bit since 4.5. At some books now. But my numbers really like Houston on both sides of the ball. When I'm looking at adjusted success rate, the offense is 5th. Deshaun Watson's obviously been great, and we've already talked to him about him on the show. The defense is 9th, and that's pretty good. Obviously, no more J.J. Watt, but they did add Gary and Connolly to that secondary, and this was a guy that Football Outsiders thought might emerge as a shutdown corner this year. Really didn't look like that happened in Oakland, but now he's in Houston, and that certainly helps with some of the injuries that they potentially have on that side of the ball. And Baltimore is actually really interesting as well. I mean, we've talked about Lamar Jackson, but I definitely asked the question, I was like, well, are they a little bit overvalued after beating New England? And how much credit should we give them for beating a Cincy team that's really struggled this year? So when I look at the pure numbers, the offense is 3rd in my adjusted success rate, and the defense is 24th. And I feel like those two numbers are going to come together over the course of the rest of the season. I definitely expect a little bit of regression in what Lamar Jackson is doing. We came into the season with questions about whether he can throw the ball. He has been great, but can he keep that up? I think defensive coordinators are going to figure out a little bit better how to scheme around some of his running as well. And then when you look at the defense, it really shouldn't be that bad. You look at some of the PFF grades for their secondary, and they're actually quite excellent. So they've really struggled. It looks like they've really struggled in the front 7. They're not getting a lot of pressure. But when you have that coverage, I think that can lead to better play on the defensive side of the ball. So my numbers say Baltimore is going to win by 1.5. Definitely suggest value on Houston, and I'll take them.
That's actually pretty good value, a 3-point gap. And I think that it kind of goes back to what we were discussing both with Edward today, but also with Dr. Eric Eager when he was talking about the Texans in that London game, where we're at a point where the market's actually maybe undervaluing Deshaun Watson. And,
I should have mentioned that, and that was part of my thinking with this. I was like, what? Are we getting value on Deshaun Watson again?
Exactly. And he mentioned something, I don't know if it was off air or when we were talking, about how Deshaun Watson has changed in season. Yeah. He has lowered his time to throw. He's getting that ball out of there. They have used 2 different starting left tackles and 3 different starting right tackles over their past 4, I believe, games. And Deshaun Watson's sack rate is non-existent. And he always used to be a guy who loved taking sacks. He loved to hang on the ball, but he hasn't been doing that. And if you take that out of Deshaun Watson's game, I don't know. The sky's the limit for that guy. He's so good. So I have faith in the Baltimore offense. I think that they are pretty legit. I think that if I had to pick a side here, though, I would go with Houston because of my faith in Deshaun Watson. He's getting Will Fuller back potentially this week. That offense could be very healthy. Laramie Tunsil and Titus Howard both got an unlimited practice on Wednesday. So the offense is getting healthier. They're already, I think, undervalued. So It's going to be a fun game, and I would agree with you that I prefer the Houston side of this game. So Houston +4 for Ed. I want to talk about my boy Jared Goff. And like I said, I love Jared Goff. I am higher on him than a lot of people as an individual player. But I think, and the reason that I like Jared Goff is because I think it's valuable when a quarterback shows that he can excel in a good system. And Goff has done that the past few years. Not every quarterback can take advantage of a good system, and Goff did that. But this is not a plus system anymore. And it really makes me down on the Rams right now. The Rams will not have Brandon Cooks for this game. He's the only player on this team who has a sub 4.5 40. And we've seen the effects of lacking a field stretcher for the Eagles this year. The Bengals offense was kind of okay when John Ross was healthy. And then once he got hurt, their offense went in the tank. And I think the Rams will experience something similar here with Cooks missing again. And the offensive line is a mess. They had already lost their left guard for the year due to a torn ACL. Then last week, their center, Brian Allen, got hurt. He had bad PFF grades, but I thought he was playing a little bit better than that. I thought he was playing okay. So losing him was a downgrade. I think it's a pretty big loss. Their right tackle, Rob Havenstein, also got hurt in that game. He will not play. I believe he's actually the worst tackle on PFF, but entering the year, he was one of two guys I actually had faith in. So losing him is not a positive. Their starting line will include Austin Blythe at center. He knows the system because he's been there for a while, but he's been a right guard most of his career and has not been a good right guard. Austin Corbett will start at one of the guard spots. He was acquired via trade from the Browns a few weeks ago. If you can't start on the interior for the Browns, yikes. Other starters in the offensive line will both be rookies. They got Bobby Evans. He was a third-round pick this year, and David Edwards, who was a fifth-rounder. Evans is probably going to start at right tackle and face Khalil Mack. Not great, Bob. If you don't want to bank on Mitchell Trubisky on the road to win a bet, then I think that you could just go with the Rams team total at 23 points, bet the under on that, and I would be okay with that. But I do think there is enough here. Well, I will plug in the Bears at +6.5. It's just the offensive line. Like, my adoration of Jared Goff was because of his good system and because he excelled in that good system. That good system is non-existent now. So I think that it's good to bet against the Rams, either go with the Bears +6.5 or under in the team total at 23 points, but I will go with the Bears +6.5 in this game. Ed, what do your numbers say about the Rams? Because they've had kind of a tough schedule, so adjusted success rate will account for that. What does it say when it looks at this team?
Yeah, I mean, it has Rams by about 5 in this game, so definitely suggesting value on the side of Chicago if you want to throw up in your mouth and back Mitchell Trubisky. So yeah, I mean, I was looking at it before. Like, the numbers are better than you think on the Rams. Let me pull it up real quick.
They face every team that's in the top 5 in adjusted sack rate according to Football Outsiders. So right. I get it, but the Bears aren't there either because Akeem Hicks is gone. That matters. So I don't think this Bears defense is like a top end one anymore. I just think they'll be good enough to beat this offensive line.
No, I think you're right. And obviously Khalil Mack is one of the premier pass rushers in the league, and he's going to be a load. But, Rams-wise, their offense is 10th in my adjusted success rate, and so is their defense. Yeah. So when you kind of look at the metrics from the whole season, they look a lot better than the Bears. Obviously, there's a lot of other things going on with the injuries and stuff. So I mean, overall, my numbers would definitely lean towards the Bears, and I think that's probably the right side.
And the market has not budged, even with the Cooks, Havenstein, and Allen news, which is interesting. I think that's worth at least a point. So interesting that has not moved. And so we want the Bears +6.5 and the Texans +4.5. Should be a pretty good week of football. I'm excited for Houston, Baltimore, obviously, but also the Monday night game. I love watching Patrick Mahomes in prime time. It stinks because it means he's not on the main DFS slate, but whatever. I can live with that for sure. What else is going on for you, Ed, right now? Anything big over on the Football Analytics Show?
No, just sign up for the newsletter is where you can get a sample of my best predictions. Really proud of the work I did with the college football odds and both both audio and written version of looking at storylines from the odds. And it's been a busy week and it's been fun.
Yeah, and you get to rest now, so you made it basically
Kind
to
of,
the end
yeah.
of the week.
I
Yeah,
still have some stuff. Still have some stuff to do.
for me, my brain will shut down in about 5 minutes. So we made it. We did that, and I think that find Ed's work on the college football playoff system because I read through that earlier this week. It's a good read for sure. Or listen to the podcast version as well. Find Ed on Twitter at the Power Rank. I am on Twitter at Jim Sonnes, JimSannes. If you are a DFS player, our DFS Week 11 preview went up earlier today with myself and Brandon Gadulis. You can check that out by searching for the Number Fire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed, and make sure you check out yesterday's college football and college basketball podcast here on Covering the Spread. Search for that wherever you listen to your podcast, and while you're there, make sure you subscribe and rate and review as well. Big thank you to Calvin Theobald for running the video side of things for today, as always, and keeping us on the air and chopping up clips for the @FanDuel Twitter account. Thank you, Cal, as always, and thank you to everyone for tuning in for today. Good luck with your bets across college football and the NFL in this upcoming weekend, and we'll talk to you again next week. This has been Covering the Spread right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network.